Usually, when you break your arm, the medical x-ray is it's entirely binary.
Right, yeah. It's just right there in black and white.
Exactly. I mean, the doctor points to that glowing, jagged white line on the film and says, there it is. That's the fracture.
Yeah, it's visible, it's clean.
And honestly, it's comforting. Like, we like things to be categorized and easily diagnosed. But when you step into the world of human relationships and spiritual health, that x-ray machine just completely shatters.
Absolutely, it's a mess.
The diagnostic landscape of the human heart is so murky. We hide our symptoms, we mask our pride, and, we misdiagnose ourselves constantly.
We're practically experts at self-deception.
Totally. Which is exactly why the text we are looking at today is so jarring. We're focusing on what is arguably the most famous passage on love in human history, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 and 5.
Right, the classic, love is patient, love is kind.
Yeah, the one on every wedding invitation ever. Welcome to Reformed Thinking, our deep dive into the profound theological truths that shape the Christian mind and life.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're just tearing down the sentimental baggage attached to those famous verses. Because, according to the historical and textual evidence in our sources, the Apostle Paul was not writing a beautiful romantic wedding poem.
Not even close.
No. He was delivering this devastating, diagnostic, apostolic broadside aimed directly at a deeply arrogant, toxic, and quite frankly, self-deluded church community.
I mean, it really is the absolute definition of a diagnostic cross-examination. When you strip away all that subjective, emotional, highly therapeutic baggage that our modern culture has, attached to the word love, what you are left with in this Greek text is a gritty, unyielding architectural blueprint.
Wow, an architectural blueprint.
Yeah, it is the architecture of sovereign love. And it was originally written to a group of people who honestly thought they were at the absolute pinnacle of spiritual maturity.
But they weren't.
Not at all. Paul wrote this to show them that they were, in fact, spiritually bankrupt.
Man, that is intense. So, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly what this active, profoundly theological love actually is, why the original audience desperately needed to hear it, and how it serves as a mirror exposing our own hearts today.
Which is going to be uncomfortable, but necessary.
Exactly. So, for you listening, I challenge you right out of the gate here. Evaluate your own relationships, your digital habits, and your spiritual life against this unyielding standard we are about to uncover.
It's going to be a real aha moment for a lot of people regarding what true maturity looks like.
I think so, too. We're going to look at the historical context, the theological mechanics, and the modern application of this text. But to truly grasp the explosive force of what Paul is writing here, we can't just start with the text itself, right?
No, you really can't. You'd miss the whole point.
Right. We have to travel back to the 1st century, to the chaotic environment of ancient Corinth, just to understand the disease that required this specific medicine.
Because the context is everything here.
Exactly. And looking at the maps and the historical data from the source material, Corinth wasn't just some quiet religious retreat. It was the absolute bottleneck of the ancient Mediterranean world.
Oh, completely. It sat on this very narrow isthmus that basically connected mainland Greece to the Peloponnesian Peninsula.
And that geography is super important, isn't it?
It's the key to understanding its entire culture, honestly. Because it sat on that narrow isthmus, it had 2 major seaports. You had Lycium to the west on the Gulf of Corinth, and Cenchreae to the east on the Saronic Gulf.
Okay, so it's a massive shipping hub.
Right. And navigating the waters around the southern tip of Greece, specifically Cape Malea, was just incredibly treacherous for ancient maritime trade.
Like deadly treacherous.
Oh, absolutely. There was actually a famous ancient proverb that said, "Let him who sails around Malea forget his home."
Wow. Meaning you're probably going to die.
Basically, yeah. So rather than risk sinking and losing all their cargo, ship captains would dock at one of Corinth's ports, unload everything, and literally drag their ships on rollers across a 4-mile paved trackway.
Wait, they dragged whole ships across land?
They did. It was called the diolkos. They dragged them from one port to the other to avoid that southern cape.
That is insane. I had no idea they did that.
It's pretty wild, and that geographical reality made Corinth this massive, wealthy, highly transient hub. I mean, it was a city just buzzing with sailors, merchants, wealthy shipping magnates.
A real melting pot, then.
Exactly, a constant influx of foreign ideas and foreign gods.
And the sources use 2 specific Greek words to describe the operating system of the city's culture, right? Algon and Philotimia.
Yes.
It paints a picture of a society that was like less about community and entirely about cutthroat upward mobility.
Oh, yeah. The Greeks and Romans of that era operated on an ethos entirely defined by those two concepts. So agon literally means competition.
Is that where we get the word agony?
Yes, exactly. Because life was viewed as this perpetual agonizing contest. You were always competing. And then philotimia translates to the intense pursuit of personal honor, social status, and prestige.
So it's basically a society-wide rat race.
Totally. In Corinth, your worth as a human being was measured exclusively by your public rhetoric, your wealth, your social leverage, and, well, your ability to dominate your rivals.
Wow. So weakness was not an option.
Weakness was absolutely despised. Dominance was celebrated. It was a society where everyone was just constantly clawing their way to the top of the social ladder.
And hovering over all this corporate ladder climbing was literal idolatry.
Right.
Because looming nearly 2,000 feet above the city was the Acro-Corinth, which was this massive rock outcropping that housed the famous Temple of Aphrodite.
The goddess of love and beauty, which in Corinth meant something very specific.
Right, because the city was universally infamous for its sexual licentiousness.
Infamous is almost an understatement. The historical sources note that throughout the ancient Greco-Roman world, a specific Greek verb was actually coined. Oh, right, Corinthiazomai.
Exactly, Corinthiazomai, which literally meant to act like a Corinthian.
Which was basically a slur, right?
Yeah, it was a proverbial synonym for unhinged sexual debauchery. If someone said you were acting like a Corinthian, they were calling you severely immoral.
And then on top of that, right outside the city, they hosted the Isthmian Games,
which were second only to the Olympics in prominence.
So you've got this intense religious debauchery mixed with elite athletic competition.
Right, and these games just further fueled this cultural idolization of physical strength, competitive dominance, and individual glory.
All for a temporary prize. Right?
Yeah, these athletes would fiercely compete for a temporary crown made of withered pine or sometimes celery leaves.
Celery leaves. Wow, so the Apostle Paul walks into this intense, hypersexualized, hyper-competitive, status-obsessed city around AD 50.
Yes, right into the middle of that chaos.
He preaches the gospel, and, by sovereign grace, he plants a church.
A very diverse church, too. Yeah, looking at the demographic data in the epistles, the people who converted came from wide different socioeconomic backgrounds.
You had wealthy patrons, enslaved people, Jews, Romans, and Greeks, all gathering in one house.
Which sounds beautiful in theory. But the crisis of 1 Corinthians is that when they walked through the doors of the house church, they didn't leave their pagan competitive baggage outside.
Not at all. They just brought it right in with them.
They imported the entire economy of worldly pride, the agon and the philotimia, right into the life of the Christian assembly. I mean, they were literally forming celebrity cliques around church leaders.
It's tragic, honestly. The factions were tearing the community apart. Paul opens the letter by addressing the reality that one group is saying, we follow Paul, while another says, we follow Apollos.
And Apollos was kind of a big deal rhetorically.
Oh, huge. He was a highly polished, eloquent Alexandrian orator. And because the Corinthians loved their rhetoric, he heavily appealed to that demographic.
It's like picking your favorite podcast host and fighting about it.
Exactly. Then another group says, we follow Cephas. And then you have the most spiritually arrogant groom of all claiming, well, we just follow Christ.
Oh, the we don't need human teachers crowd.
Right. It was just intense tribalism. And beyond the cliques, the sources detail how wealthy members were dragging poorer brothers into pagan Roman courts to sue them for financial gain.
Suing each other.
Ain't it?
Inside the church.
Yes. Completely destroying the public witness of the church in the process. And they were even tolerating scandalous sexual immorality because some believed their newfound spiritual liberty meant what they did with their physical body didn't matter.
Wow. And the breakdown in their community was so severe that it even corrupted the Lord's Supper, right?
It really did, which is just wild to think about.
Because in the ancient Roman world, banquets were deeply tied to social status.
Very much so.
The wealthy patron hosting the church in his home would have a dining room, a triclinium, that only held about 10 to 12 VIPs.
Right, the inner room.
While the rest of the believers, mostly the poor and the enslaved, would have to stand outside in the atrium.
And that socioeconomic division is exactly what Paul condemns in chapter 11. Because the wealthy members would arrive early, eat all the high-quality food, and literally get drunk in the inner room.
While the others got nothing.
Exactly. The working class members, the enslaved believers who couldn't arrive until after their grueling daily labor was finished, would arrive to find nothing left.
They were publicly humiliated at the very meal designed to celebrate their equal standing at the foot of the cross.
It completely fractured the meaning of communion.
But the most acute problem, the issue that directly triggers the famous words of 1 Corinthians 13, was how they treated the spiritual gifts.
That is the ultimate irony here. The pinnacle of their competition wasn't money or food. They weaponized theology.
Weaponized theology, I like that phrase.
They took the gifts of the Holy Spirit, specifically the spectacular sign gift of speaking in tongues, and turned them into competitive badges of elite status.
So they completely misunderstood the purpose of grace.
Completely. They treated charismatic manifestations as the ultimate proof of spiritual superiority. The mindset was basically, because I can speak in tongues louder and more ecstatically than you, I am clearly on a higher spiritual plane and I possess more honor.
So it became a performance.
Public worship completely devolved from a place of mutual edification into a chaotic platform for self-display. They mistook giftedness for godliness.
Okay, so this brings us to the structure of the letter. Because if chapters 12 and 14 are the walls of the church structure, then chapter 13 is the load-bearing foundation.
Without it, the entire community just collapses.
Right, because in chapter 12, Paul talks about how the church is a single body with many different members, and the Holy Spirit sovereignly distributes different gifts for the common good.
Right, not for individual glory.
And then in chapter 14, he gives strict regulations on how to maintain order in corporate worship. He specifically commands them to prioritize prophecy, which builds people up in a language they understand, over ecstatic tongues.
Because tongues just cause a racket if there is no interpreter.
Exactly. So Paul has to actually interrupt his specific instructions on corporate worship to lay down that load-bearing foundation of Christian character in chapter 13.
He has to, because the Corinthians were so obsessed with acquiring the most prominent, flashy gifts. Paul concludes chapter 12 by telling them, I will show you a still more excellent way.
And that way is not another spiritual superpower or mystical experience.
No, it is the governing grace of sovereign love.
Which brings up something fascinating in the sources about the latter half of chapter 13 regarding these specific miraculous gifts.
Right, verses 8 and following.
Because Paul says prophecies will fail, tongues will cease, and knowledge will pass away when the perfect comes. And our sources outline a firm cessationist perspective derived from this text.
Yes. The cessationist argument presented in the sources centers entirely on the purpose of the miraculous sign gifts in the first century.
So how does that argument work, specifically?
Well, from this theological perspective, gifts like ecstatic tongues, prophecy, and miraculous healings were essentially temporary scaffolding.
Scaffolding for a building.
Exactly. They were given specifically during the foundational era of the early church to authenticate the message of the apostles before the New Testament canon was actually completed.
Okay, so once the Bible is finished.
Right. Once the foundation of the house is laid and the building is, meaning the full revelation of Scripture is available, the temporary scaffolding is removed. It's no longer needed.
So Paul's theological point to the Corinthians is that they are obsessing over the scaffolding, which is destined to pass away, while completely ignoring the permanent architecture of the building, which is love.
You nailed it. Love, he argues, is eternal. The gifts were temporary.
That makes so much sense of the context. But before Paul gets to the detailed blueprint of what love actually is in verses 4 and 5, he uses this incredible, shocking hyperbole in the first 3 verses.
Oh, it's brutal.
He essentially tells them that if he speaks the tongues of men and angels, which must have hit the Corinthians right in the ego,
Yes,
since that's what they were bragging about, but has not love, he is just a noisy gong.
Just making a racket.
But then he escalates it to the extreme. He says, if I have prophetic powers, understand all mysteries, have faith to move mountains, if I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I am nothing.
It's a staggering statement.
Okay, wait. I'm struggling with this escalation. Are you telling me that if I literally run into a burning building to save someone, or if I move actual mountains with my radical faith, or if I become a physical martyr for Christianity, my spiritual bank account is at absolute zero without this specific love?
That's exactly what he's saying.
That feels incredibly harsh.
Yeah.
Like, isn't radical sacrifice enough?
It is meant to be deeply unsettling. Paul is exposing the terrifying reality of religious hypocrisy here. The core truth is that motivations matter infinitely before a holy God.
Because God sees the heart.
Yes. If you divorce spectacular giftedness or even ultimate physical sacrifice from a genuine love for God and neighbor, it just devolves into spiritual vanity, becomes a massive exercise in self-glorification.
Wow. So I could give away millions of dollars, but if I do it for the wrong reason, it's worthless.
Exactly. You can give all your money to the poor purely to build a philanthropic legacy and win the applause of men. You can even offer your body to the flames of martyrdom because you are proud and want your name remembered in the annals of history, not because you are resting in the grace of Christ.
It's all just religious theater.
Outward religious performance, no matter how orthodox, radical, or sacrificial it looks, is completely bankrupt before God if the internal, spirit-wrought disposition of love is absent.
Okay, that leads us directly into verses 4 and 5, where he defines what this disposition actually is. And the grammar here completely shifts how we view love.
It's a grammatical revelation, honestly.
Because in English, we almost always use adjectives to describe love. Like we describe a state of being or an overwhelming emotion. We say, I am in love, or love is beautiful, or love is blind.
We treat it like a feeling that happens to us.
Right. But looking at the original Greek text in the sources,
Yeah.
Paul doesn't use a single adjective.
Not one. And that is one of the most vital exegetical insights of this entire passage. Paul personifies love and deploys a rapid-fire series of 15 verbs in the present active indicative tense.
15 verbs.
Yes. He doesn't use adjectives because love is not defined here by passive feelings, hormonal responses, or emotional states. By using present tense verbs, Paul emphasizes that love is a continuous, habitual, dynamic pattern of conduct.
It's what you do.
Love is what you do, and crucially, love is what you refuse to do. He takes this abstract, highly romanticized noun and turns it into the grueling, visible reality of daily discipleship.
Let's dive into those verbs. Let's look at the first verb in the positive binary that opens verse 4. Love is patient. The Greek word is makrothymai.
Makrothymai, yes, it's a compound word. So makros means long or distant, and thymos means passion, wrath, or temper.
So long-tempered.
Literally, yes, it translates to having a long fuse or being long-tempered.
Which means it's entirely defensive. It's the ability to absorb a blow without detonating.
And that was completely countercultural to the Greco-Roman world.
How so?
Well, in classical Greek philosophy, heavily influenced by Aristotle, this concept of long-suffering was not considered a virtue at all. It was actually viewed as a vice.
Really? A vice?
Yes. The secular Greek honor culture prized swift, decisive vengeance. Remember the agon, the competition?
Right.
If someone insulted your honor or wronged you, the socially acceptable and required response was to strike back quickly to reestablish your dominance.
Show them who's boss.
Exactly. To be long-suffering was viewed as a sign of weakness, a lack of ambition, or sheer cowardice.
But Paul flips that entirely.
Completely. Paul bypasses Greek philosophy entirely and reaches back into the Old Testament. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, this exact word is used to translate the Hebrew idiom for being slow to anger.
Which is how God describes himself.
Yes, it is the primary, self-declared covenantal attribute of Yahweh himself in Exodus 34.
Okay, so Paul is telling this hyper-competitive church, you want to know what true spiritual maturity looks like. It's not seeking swift vengeance when someone steps on your toes or challenges your status. It is absorbing the relational blow without retaliating.
Taking on the long fuse of God himself.
It's relational endurance. But Paul doesn't let love remain purely defensive, right?
No, he doesn't.
He immediately pairs it with an offensive verb. Love is kind. The Greek verb is Christouetai.
Christouetai, which is an incredibly rare word. In fact, in all the New Testament, it only occurs right here in this specific verse.
Wow, really? So what does it mean?
It denotes active, practical, useful goodness, while makrothymai, or patience, passively endures the injury and absorbs the pressure. Christouetai actively pours out grace.
It's going on the offensive with goodness.
Exactly. It aggressively seeks out opportunities to be benevolent, especially in response to hostility. It is an advancing mercy.
You know, it makes me think, patience without kindness is just like aggressively biting your tongue while you glare at someone.
Yeah, you're just seething internally.
Yeah, you aren't striking back, sure, but your internal monologue is just reciting a list of all the ways they are awful, and your body language is radiating ice.
Everyone can feel it.
But kindness, Christouetai, is baking a cake for the person you're currently biting your tongue about. It is moving toward them with practical goodness, not just coldly tolerating their existence from across the room.
That's a great analogy, because if a community only practices patience without kindness, it quickly curdles into cold endurance or a kind of self-righteous martyrdom.
Where everyone is just thinking, look at how much I am putting up with.
Exactly. And conversely, if you just have kindness without patience, your kindness will evaporate the second someone offends or inconveniences you.
So you both.
Sovereign love demands both the long fuse and the active goodness. The early church father Tertullian noted that it was this specific combination that completely shocked the pagan Roman world.
Because it's so alien to their honor culture.
Yes. The pagans would look at the early Christians who were enduring intense persecution and exclaim, "See how they love one another and how they are ready to die for one another." It was an alien concept in an economy of vengeance.
Okay, so after that positive 1-2 punch, Paul unleashes this barrage of negative verbs, things that love destroys.
This is where he really goes after the Corinthians.
Yeah, looking at the sources, he targets the exact triadic sins of pride that were tearing their community apart: envy, boasting, and arrogance. Let's start with envy. Love does not envy. The Greek is ouzeloi.
Right. And the root of zele means to boil or to burn. In this specific context, it denotes a malignant, boiling jealousy and bitter discontentment at the success, the spiritual gifts, or the social status of someone else.
So it's looking at someone else's prominent spiritual gift, or, their beautiful home or their well-behaved kids, and feeling that hot, burning resentment in your chest because you feel like their success is somehow a direct threat to your own value.
Yes, and that is the direct result of the Corinthian agar, that competitive mindset.
A zero-sum game.
Exactly. Envy views another person's blessing as a personal deficit. If you win, I lose. But sovereign love mortifies that boiling resentment. True love actually finds genuine joy in the exaltation of a brother or sister.
Because it recognizes where the gifts come from.
Right, it recognizes the theological truth that all gifts are distributed sovereignly by God for the good of the whole body, not for individual glory.
Which flows right into the next negative verb. Love does not boast.
Yeah.
The Greek is upaperutai. And the sources highlight that this word is almost like an onomatopoeia for a windbag.
I love that imagery. It mimics the sound of endless, arrogant, blustering perperoitai.
Even the famous Roman orator Cicero used a form of this word, didn't he?
He did. He used it to describe his own political grandstanding before the Senate. It represents the outward parade of the self.
Like a verbal advertisement.
Exactly. It is the verbal or behavioral advertisement of your supposed superiority. The Corinthians were parading their spiritual gifts, specifically their ecstatic tongues, like cheap street performers desperately trying to solicit applause from the congregation. Boasting is the marketing department of pride.
The marketing department of pride. That is so good. And if boasting is the outward parade, arrogance is the internal disease causing it, right?
Always.
Love is not arrogant, or is not puffed up. The Greek is ophysiutai, which literally comes from the word for a bellows, the tool you use to pump air into a fire.
Paul uses this specific imagery of being puffed up several times throughout this letter to diagnose the core Corinthian disease. They were swollen with an exaggerated, inflated estimate of their own theological importance.
It's full of hot air.
Exactly. Carnal human nature covets what others have, which is zeloi. It parades what it has, which is perperetai. And it inflates its own self-worth, which is physiutai.
But sovereign love flattens human arrogance with the crushing weight of divine majesty.
Beautifully put. When a believer truly grasps the sheer, unmerited grace of God in salvation, they recognize their own absolute spiritual bankruptcy before Him. There is simply no room left for an inflated ego.
Wow. Okay, but this internal pride naturally bleeds outward into how we treat other people.
It never stays internal.
Right. So moving into verse 5, Paul shifts from the inflated ego to the actual battleground of relationships, conflict resolution, and human rights. He writes, "Love is not rude or does not act unbecomingly." The verb is ashimoni.
Ashimoni means violating proper decorum, acting indecently, or acting out of proper form. It is the act of treating others as though their dignity, their cultural background, or their conscience doesn't matter.
Which the Corinthians were doing all the time.
Constantly. In Corinth, this rudeness was on full tragic display when the rich humiliated the poor at the Lord's table, or when the charismatic members would shout over one another in the public assembly without any regard for order or the edification of the listener. Love, by contrast, possesses a sacred tact. It honors the dignity of others.
It's the exact opposite of the "I'm just being brutally honest" excuse that people use to act like a jerk and bulldoze someone's feelings today.
Oh, absolutely.
Love cares deeply about how the truth lands on the other person. And then Paul hits the absolute foundational principle of human selfishness. Love does not seek its own. Usititahuts.
This is massive.
The sources reference theologians like Augustine and Martin Luther here.
Yeah.
They used a specific Latin phrase to describe this fallen human condition, right?
Yes, incurvatus in se, which means curved inward upon oneself.
That is such a vivid picture.
It is one of the most profound theological descriptions of the fall of man. Before sin, humanity was perfectly upright, looking outward to God and outward to neighbor. But the fall introduced a massive gravitational collapse of the soul.
So we turned in on ourselves.
Completely. Fallen man is curved inward. We make self-preservation, self-promotion, and self-gratification the supreme governing laws of our existence. Every interaction, every relationship, every theological debate is viewed through the inward curve lens of, how does this benefit me? How does this elevate my status? How does this protect my rights?
But the love described in verse 5 completely abdicates that throne. It willingly and joyfully limits its own liberty, its own preference, and its own comfort if a neighbor's spiritual edification requires it.
It reverses the curse, essentially.
It stops asking the worldly question, what are my rights? And starts asking the cross-shaped question, what serves my brother?
And because fallen humans are so severely curved inward, we absolutely hate it when our self-interest is blocked or our rights are infringed upon.
You get so angry.
Which perfectly explains the psychological mechanism behind the next verb. Love is not provoked. The Greek is proxenetai. It means to be sharpened, irritated, or ignited into a sudden, sharp paroxysm of wrath.
So it's having a hair-trigger temper.
Yeah.
Being touchy.
Exactly. Now, Scripture certainly recognizes righteous anger against injustice, abuse, and sin. God himself expresses righteous wrath. But this specific Greek word condemns touchiness.
The defensiveness.
Right, that hyper-defensive readiness to flare up in anger precisely because self feels slighted, self is inconvenienced, or self is disrespected. Love is not easily ignited into explosive outbursts of temper simply because its own preferences are crossed.
Okay, then we reach what might be the most devastating phrase in the whole text, especially for anyone who has ever been deeply wronged.
This one is tough.
Love does not keep a record of wrongs, or does not reckon evil. The sources explain this is a literal accounting term, right?
Yeah.
Logizatai to kekanon.
Yes, logizatai is a highly precise commercial accounting term from Hellenistic Greek. It was the word used by merchants and bankers for entering a financial debt into a ledger book so that it remained firmly on the official record, ensuring a future settlement.
Wow. So in human relationships, carnal man acts like a cold, calculating accountant.
We all do it.
We keep a detailed, double-entry mental ledger of every slight, every insult, every time someone forgot our birthday, every careless word a spouse said in an argument 5 years ago.
We log it all.
We log it, we brood over it, and we keep it on the books so we can demand repayment or extract revenge later. The mental ledger is so toxic because we don't just keep it for self-defense, we keep it as ammunition.
It's weaponized memory.
Yes. We act as divine accountants, waiting for the perfect moment in a disagreement to pull out a receipt from 3 years ago and say, aha, see, you always do this.
It's incredibly destructive to fellowship.
And the sources make a direct application to our modern cultural moment here, specifically analyzing how modern systems of outrage operate based on this exact concept.
The sources point out that much of our modern cultural economy runs entirely on the mechanism of logizatai to kakon, keeping the ledger.
How so?
Well, whether it is the algorithms of social media that profit from sharp provocation and outrage, or secular sociological frameworks and identity politics, the sources explicitly mention critical race theory as an example here.
Okay, so it's a systemic issue too.
According to the sources, these systems heavily rely on dividing people into factions and keeping meticulous, historical ledgers of systemic and personal offense. The currency of these cultural systems is grievance.
So they need the ledger to survive.
Right. They require keeping the ledger open indefinitely to leverage power, exact public shaming, or demand endless repayment.
But the biblical mandate of sovereign love completely short-circuits that economy.
It destroys it. Love refuses to weaponize the memory of evil. It obliterates the memory of personal offenses through the mechanism of gospel forgiveness.
Yeah, to be clear, this does not mean love is gullible, right? Nor does it enable abuse.
Absolutely not. It does not mean ignoring severe wrongdoing or failing to pursue justice through proper civil authorities. But in the realm of personal vengeance and community fellowship, love writes injuries in the dust. You close the account book.
If we look at this diagnostic blueprint honestly, no ledger keeping, no touchiness, constant active kindness, zero internal arrogance, It is crushing.
It really is.
If I hold my daily life up to the x-ray of 1 Corinthians 13:4 and 5, it shows a shattered bone. I am not perfectly patient. I am not consistently kind. I get incredibly touchy when my ego is threatened. And I have definitely maintained mental ledgers against people who have hurt me.
Same here.
If this text is simply a moral checklist, I am a total failure.
And that is exactly what the original Corinthian audience was supposed to feel and what we are supposed to feel today. Our sources reveal a massive foundational theological pivot right here. This text is not merely a moral to-do list. In theology, this function of the text is known as the first use of the law.
Let's break that down because that is a crucial theological concept.
Yeah.
What exactly is the first use of the law?
The first use of the law is the understanding that God's moral standard functions primarily like a mirror.
A mirror, okay.
Think about it. A mirror is excellent at showing you the dirt on your face, but a mirror has no power to wash your face.
Right. You can't scrub your face with a piece of glass.
Exactly. When you hold your life up to the unyielding standard of 1 Corinthians 13, it reflects back your total inability to meet God's holy requirements. It exposes the depth of your incurvatus in se, your inward curved selfishness.
So it diagnoses the disease.
The Corinthians thought they were spiritually elite because they spoke in tongues. Paul holds up this mirror to show them they are utterly spiritually bankrupt.
So the purpose of this text isn't just to leave us in a state of miserable condemnation. It exposes the disease so that we will desperately seek the cure. We are driven somewhere else, specifically to a person.
Yes.
Because we can literally substitute the name Jesus for the word love in this text.
When you substitute his name, it reveals the breathtaking beauty of his historical incarnation. Jesus was supremely patient. Makrotheme. He bore with the slowness, the intense rivalry, and the ultimate betrayal of his own disciples without lashing out in vengeance.
And he was actively kind, kresturtai.
Yes. Healing the sick, feeding the hungry, and walking the filthy feet of the men who were about to abandon him. Jesus knew no envy, for he sought only the glory of his Father. Jesus did not boast or puff himself up. Though he existed eternally in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant.
He never acted unbecomingly or rudely. He didn't seek his own interest. He came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom. He was not provoked to sinful anger when he was mocked and reviled.
And climactically, as Jesus hung upon the horrific wood of the Roman cross, while wicked men pierced his hands and feet, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
In that moment, he was actively tearing up the ledger of evil.
That is the gospel. And this is where we have to unpack two more vital theological terms from the sources: active obedience and passive obedience. These are the mechanics of how Christ's perfect love actually saves the believer.
Break those terms down for us. Let's ELI 5. Explain it like I'm 5, because active and passive obedience can sound like heavy seminary jargon.
I know, it really can. Okay, think of your spiritual standing before God like a bank account. Because of our sin, our pride, and our ledger keeping, our account is overdrawn by billions of dollars.
We're severely in the red.
We are facing eternal debtor's prison. Christ's passive obedience refers to his suffering and death on the cross. By willingly suffering the wrath of God, Jesus pays the massive penalty for our debt. The debt is canceled, the account is brought to zero.
Okay, so passive obedience cancels the debt.
Right, but a zero balance doesn't make you rich, it just means you aren't in debt. Heaven requires a perfect, positive balance of righteousness. That is where Christ's active obedience comes in.
He's life before the cross.
Yes. Throughout his 33 years of earthly life, Jesus actively obeyed every single command of God's law. He perfectly lived out every verb in 1 Corinthians 13. He earned a flawless record of righteousness, a spiritual billion-dollar positive balance.
And justification is the legal declaration where that perfect balance is credited to us.
Precisely. Through faith alone, a great exchange happens. Our massive debt of lovelessness is transferred to Christ on the cross, and his perfect billion-dollar record of sovereign love is transferred into our account.
That is just incredible.
When God the Father looks at the justified believer, he doesn't see a failing, impatient, touchy sinner. He sees the perfect patience and kindness of Jesus Christ. You are accepted not because you loved perfectly, but because Christ loved perfectly in your place.
So if Christ's perfect record is legally credited to me, does that mean my own behavior doesn't matter anymore? Am I off the hook for actually trying to love the difficult people in my life? Like, how does this theology change my actual Tuesday afternoon?
This is where we move from justification to sanctification. Justification is the one-time legal declaration that you are righteous. Sanctification are the ongoing, lifelong, progressive work of the Holy Spirit actually making you holy in your daily life.
Oh, it's a process.
To use a medical analogy, justification is the life-saving surgery that removes the tumor and saves your life. Sanctification is the months of physical therapy where you slowly, sometimes painfully, learn how to walk on the healed leg.
I love that analogy.
Once you are justified, the Holy Spirit comes to indwell you, and he begins to progressively work this exact architecture of love into your habits. You no longer manufacture love to earn God's acceptance.
Because the pressure is off.
Exactly. Because you are already fully and eternally accepted in Christ, you are now free to learn how to love. The engine of your obedience completely changes from the terrifying fear of condemnation to profound gratitude for grace.
Wow. Applying this architecture of sovereign love to the modern church, it completely indicts modern evangelical pragmatism, doesn't it?
It really does.
Today, we are so often obsessed with external metrics. We measure a church's success by numerical growth, the slickness of the production, the emotional highs of the music, and, the dynamic charisma of the leadership.
It is the exact modern equivalent of the Corinthian obsession with spectacular spiritual gifts and polished rhetoric, just wrapped in better technology.
But Paul's words deliver a decisive, fatal blow to that pragmatic model.
Completely fatal. A church can have a massive mega facility, million-dollar production values, and a speaker who can hold an audience of thousands in the palm of his hand. But if that community lacks the self-denying, long-suffering, ledger-destroying love of verses 4 and 5, it is spiritually dead.
It is just a clanging cymbal.
True spiritual maturity isn't measured by marketability or cultural relevance. It is measured by the mortification of pride and the presence of active, self-sacrificial kindness in the pews.
The sources also apply this blueprint directly to the home, to marriage. The modern divorce rate is often a tragic monument to human self-seeking that zeteta hoots.
Seeking its own.
Yeah. Marriages collapse when spouses demand their own rights, explode in touchy anger over inconveniences, and maintain detailed historical ledgers of past mistakes to use in the next argument.
It's the ledger that destroys so many marriages. Reversing that trend requires crucifying the ego daily. It requires spouses who refuse to weaponize past failures and who actively practice the long-fused patience and practical kindness of Christ toward one another, fueled by the grace they have received in the gospel.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's look back at the immense journey we've taken today. We started in the chaotic, status-obsessed, hyper-competitive streets of ancient pagan Corinth, where believers were dragging their worldly pride into the church and weaponizing their theology to climb a religious corporate ladder.
A completely toxic environment.
We walked through the grueling diagnostic verbs of Paul's apostolic broadside, discovering that love is not a passive feeling or a romantic poem, but a gritty, continuous action of enduring provocation, pouring out kindness, mortifying pride, and tearing up the ledgers of past wrongs.
Present active indicative verbs.
Yes. And finally, we found that none of us can survive this diagnostic X-ray on our own. We were driven to the cross, to the perfect fulfillment of this love, found only in the active and passive obedience of Jesus Christ.
It is a profound paradigm shift. It completely reorients how we view our own hearts, how we view our justification before God, and how we treat the people around us.
So for you listening, I want you to remember this. That beautiful poetic passage you admire at weddings, the one stitched onto the decorative pillow on your couch, is actually a violent call to die to yourself.
Yes, it is.
It is a summons to put away your arrogance, your touchiness, and to permanently delete your mental ledgers of offense. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought rooted in verse 8, just past our focus text, where Paul simply says, love never ends.
Such a powerful phrase.
Because prophecy will fail, tongues will cease, and human knowledge will pass away. The temporary scaffolding of this world and all the status symbols we chase are all coming down. That means the patience and the kindness you practice today, the quiet restraint when you want to yell, the choice to forgive an old debt, the act of baking a cake for someone who annoyed you are literally the only things you will take with you into eternity.
The only things that last.
So mull this over. How does viewing sovereign love as the literal currency of the next world change the way you respond to an irritating coworker, a hostile comment online, or a frustrating spouse tomorrow morning? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.